Episode 221, From Errors Come Knowledge. This is the World Organic News for the week ending 6th of July 2020. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Let me begin with a big hola to Aristo in Tijuana. Thanks for your kind message on the World Organic News Facebook page. I really do appreciate the feedback. Thanks, mate. Now to this week's fare. Quote, spontaneous combustion is a common occurrence when storing wood chip for extended periods of time. Typically, after a few weeks of storage with a high moisture content, the risk of spontaneous combustion is significant and must be considered. Early detection and prevention of spontaneous combustion is critical in order to prevent a serious incident occurring. End quote. Now that quote comes from an article entitled Wood Chip Stockpile, Spontaneous Combustion, Early Detection on the Industrial Monitoring and Control site. Can you guess what error occurred in my life? About 5 or 6 weeks ago we received a donation of wood chips, a full truckload no less. We had them dumped onto a space we keep for this sort of thing. The last load was about 2 years old and is now a deep rich black compost. Now, this last week we decided to have a bit of a bonfire of material next to the wood chip pile, a safe distance from them, but nearby. As the bonfire started, the smoke drifted towards the wood chips. It was then that the groundkeeper and I noticed that what appeared to be smoke coming from the wood chips rather than blowing across it. On investigation, this was indeed the case. So I grabbed a rake and scraped the top off and the smoking ceased. Next morning at about 8:15 I checked the pile and it seemed to be okay. It had been a cold night, we'd had a frost at home, but it was not at work, but it had been cool. By 10:30, after we'd done our morning routines in the glass house, it was smoking again. The two fellas I had as clients that day and I grabbed rakes and slowly but determinedly pulled the pile apart. From about 2.5 metres high, 3 metres wide and 5 metres long, we pulled it down to 1 by 5 by 8 metres. As we did so, I noticed the material where the heat was greatest. We were making charcoal, or possibly even biochar. And this is good. We have 2 nearly 20 metre long polytunnels to build garden beds in over the next 3 months. So once the pile is fully cooled down, and we've had some rain on it to ensure that it's safe, we'll add the semi-charcoalized, I'm sure that's a word now that I've used it, wood chips over a cardboard layer and then start adding compost and vermicompost over that. A sort of biochar hugelkultur hybrid, so to speak. So always be on the lookout for possible benefits from your errors. From another error comes the solution to another problem. And this is a variation on the old Bill Mollison thought that waste is just a resource in the wrong place. Okay, so huge manure piles that form next to dairy feedlots pollute the groundwater and the air when the manures could be run through a biodigester to provide an even better soil amendment than just straight manures. You also get methane for cooking, heating and lighting. Of course, the cows could just be grazed regeneratively on the pastures and the soil improved that way. But we work with what we have. Speaking of which, I just started listening to a series on Regen Ag. Government funded no less, but independently produced. All the usual stuff about rotational grazing with an eye on the pasture and what's best for that. But, and this is a big but, the emphasis on photosynthesis we covered back in episodes 217 and 218 was very interesting. They basically covered the material of those episodes, diversity of plantings, continuous green coverage and so on. But there was one item that blew my mind. Now these particular farmers that were being interviewed destock their land ahead of their neighbours when they go into a drought, thinking of the pastures rather than the income, and attempting to maintain some sort of soil covering on the soil during a drought. Now, this particular farmer was both in drought and then hit by the bushfires during our last summer. Flames at least 10 metres high and so on. The organic matter in the soil appearing to burn and the future looked very glum indeed. A week after the fires had passed, though, his dry and almost denuded property he noticed was beginning to grow plants. Equally, there had been no rain. He called for help to explain what was occurring, and the gist of it went like this. The fire had burnt the humus. The humus had released hydrogen in the process, which combined with oxygen in the atmosphere to produce H2O, that is, water. The seeds within the soil that had survived the burn sprouted. Now, there are some seeds here in Australia that require a burn to sprout, so they were probably involved as well. Now, this property has been run regeneratively for about 10 years, and the farmer had focused the entirety of his efforts in that time to building soil carbon. But not just any soil carbon, he'd focused on growing living soil carbon, humus. And this is the difference between his land's reaction to fire and the chemically farmed neighbouring properties. They did not have any humus in the soil. You'll recall from episode, I think it's 218, that pouring artificial nitrogen onto land breaks the link between the plant and the microbes in the soil, as the N is available for a quick hit, so the plants don't have to go looking for the microbes. This leads to the death or at the very least significant reduction in the quantity of soil microbiota. And this extra soil humus that this fellow had been working on was an unexpected benefit from Regen Ag that no one I can find had thought of. Just let that sink in for a minute. The fires came through, and the process of the fire created a chemical reaction which allowed water to be created, so to speak, in the soil, so that the soil could continue to cover itself with plant matter. So later on in the program, I heard, in an Australian accent of all things, something that could have come straight out of Masanobu Fukuoka's mouth, and the quote went something like this. The soil is always trying to regenerate itself. We just have to learn to get out of the way and let it happen. Which is not dissimilar to Fukuoka's What Less Can I Do? It gave this podcaster's heart some hope. Despite the world being as it is right now, the climate situation which hasn't taken any time off, the fires in Siberia and California remind us of this. And after the droughts of this millennium and the fires here last summer, and the COVID-19 effect, and who knows what next, there is some actual genuine hope. We can get this sorted by letting the naturally evolved systems do what they are being driven to do if we stop, in inverted commas, helping quite so much. And this really is a matter of great hope. We need to do more of this sort of thing, and we also need to do it by example, so that others will see what we're doing. And when the time comes and they're ready to change, the system is up and running and they've got something to follow. And so with that hope, it only remains for me to say, there's a link to a Udemy course in the show notes entitled Growing a No-Dig Garden. And if you'd like some more formal assistance with your gardening, that could be of some help. You can also go to or send people to episode 207, where I discuss growing a quick response garden to get yours happening more swiftly. And just remember, in this unusual time, if we put in the groundwork now, we can all change the world, even if it's only a little bit to start with. And we will begin the process of decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week.